I used to think family loyalty was my currency, the invisible thread that bound us, the proof that I was a good daughter. Every bill I paid, every crisis I handled, every silence, I swallowed it all, felt like investment in love. But as I stood on the porch of my parents' vacation home, that late autumn evening, the air biting cold, and my breath trembling with disbelief, I realized I had been investing in an illusion. My name is Louise Walsh. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life financing a family that never once asked how I was doing, only what I could cover next. I built my success alone, learning the volatile dance of the stock market, while others went out married and built lives of their own. For 15 years, I've traded sunrises for stock charts, taught myself risk management through trial and panic, and somehow through sheer willpower, turned small trades into a fortune that gave my family comfort. They didn't even know they were borrowing. The truth is, I never minded helping them. My father Greg was a practical man, sharp, commanding the kind of presence that made you shrink when he spoke too directly. My mother, gentle, apologetic, always folding herself into the background of his opinions. And then there was my younger sister Megan, the light of the family, as everyone called her. She had the kind of charm that made people forgive her for anything. When she totaled her car at 22, my father called me and said, "Louise, if we let this hang over her head, it'll ruin her confidence. You can afford it." And I did, without question. When Mom's medical bills came years later, I paid those too. The vacation home. My father said it was too expensive to maintain after his retirement, but that it would break Mom's heart to sell it. "You've done well, Louise," he told me. "You could help us keep it." And so I began paying the property taxes, $7, $200 a year. Every December I wired the money, and every Christmas they toasted to family. But family, as I would learn, is a fragile word when love is conditional and gratitude fades into expectation. It started one weekend last spring. I had driven up to Bear Lake for a brief visit. The cabin was quiet. Megan wasn't there, and my parents had gone out grocery shopping. I was sitting at the kitchen counter flipping through some old mail when a manila envelope caught my eye. It was addressed to my father from Henderson and Pruitt Law. I knew that name. It was the firm that had handled my grandparents' estate years ago. At first I didn't think much of it, but as I gathered the mail into a neat pile, the envelope slipped open, revealing several documents inside. I shouldn't have looked. But curiosity, that quiet whisper of intuition, urged me on. Inside was a statement of account labeled Megan Walsh Trust Fund. My stomach dropped. I scanned line after line: transfers, interest, accrual, investment notes, and then at the bottom the total balance, $352, $400. My hands began to shake. The date of establishment read 6 years ago, right around the time my father had told me he couldn't afford to help me buy my first apartment. I remember sitting there, the sound of the lake wind pressing against the windows, staring at the numbers like they might rearrange themselves into something more merciful. But they didn't. They were cold, factual, undeniable. My father had created a trust fund for my sister, not for both of us, not even divided unfairly, but solely for her. And all those years he had looked me in the eye and said, "Money causes tension, Louise. We treat you both equally." When they returned from the store, I was sitting in silence, the documents neatly stacked on the table. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse. I just asked Dad, "What's this?" His face changed instantly, that familiar flicker of authority trying to reorganize the narrative. "Where did you find that?" he demanded. "In the mail," I said quietly. "What is it?" He hesitated, then sighed as if I were the one being unreasonable. "That's for Megan. She's not as financially capable as you. It's not favoritism, Louise, it's just practical. She'll need help later." Practical. The word echoed through me like static. "So when you said you couldn't afford to help me buy my apartment?" He didn't answer. My mother busied herself unpacking groceries, her silence the same brittle wall it had always been. That night I didn't sleep. I sat in the guest room, the legal documents spread across the bed, like evidence of something I hadn't wanted to believe for years, that love in our family wasn't unconditional. It was transactional. And I had been paying the highest price. The next morning I left early. My father called later, trying to smooth things over, telling me I'd misunderstood that every family makes different arrangements. But my trust had snapped. Over the following weeks, I replayed every instance of his manipulation. Every time he said, "You're the responsible one," which really meant, "You'll handle it." Every apology from my mother, which really meant, "Don't make your father angry." Every smile from Megan, which really meant, "You'll fix it again, won't you?" I had spent years funding their comfort while they built security for someone else. And that was when I made my decision. That summer, when the property tax bill arrived for the Bear Lake home, I didn't pay it. For the first time in a decade, I ignored it. When the reminders came, I filed them away. When my mother called to ask if I had seen the notice, I said yes, calmly, deliberately. "You might want to have Dad handle it this year," I told her. There was a pause. "Louise? Is something wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, Mom. I just think it's time the family took care of itself." The silence on the line stretched long enough for me to hear the sound of her breathing, change realization dawning, but no words to fill the gap. A few weeks later, my father called. I let it go to voicemail. His tone was sharp, controlled rage, barely masked as concern. "Louise, we've always depended on you. Don't make a scene over something you don't understand. Call me back." But I didn't. I had spent too long being their safety net. This time they could fall. By early autumn, the taxes were officially delinquent. The county notice went public, and the vacation home, the same one where we had spent Christmas mornings and family dinners, was now listed under lien warning. My father must have been furious, but for once his power stopped where my patience ended. Then on Thanksgiving weekend, Megan called. "Louise, what's going on?" She demanded, her tone somewhere between confusion and panic. "Dad said you're refusing to help with the house. Why are you being so selfish?" I almost laughed. The irony was sharp enough to draw blood. "You know about your trust, don't you?" I asked quietly. She hesitated. "What trust?" "The one with $350,000. Your name's been on for 6 years." There was a beat of silence, then a faint, "Who told you that?" I found out. Dad didn't even deny it. Her voice faltered, anger and guilt colliding. "It wasn't my idea. He said you didn't need it. That you were fine." "Yeah," I said softly. "I am fine, which is why I'm done paying for everyone else." She didn't reply. When the call ended, I stared out the window at the city lights, a strange calm settling over me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't angry, just empty. But beneath that emptiness was something unfamiliar and freeing resolve. They could call me selfish, they could call me cold, but for once my money, my effort, my peace belonged to me. I didn't know it then, but this small act of silence, this refusal, would unravel every thread of pretense my family had built. It would force the truth into the open in a way none of us could avoid. And when that moment came, I would be ready to face them, not as the obedient daughter who fixed their messes, but as the woman who had finally learned the cost of being taken for granted. The storm truly broke 2 months later, on a gray Sunday morning in February. My father's name flashed on my phone screen 3 times before I finally picked up. "Louise," he said, his tone cold but brittle around the edges, "we need to talk." I had heard that phrase my entire life, "we need to talk," always followed by, "you need to fix this." So I waited for the performance to begin. "I just got off the phone with the county," he continued. "The property at Bear Lake is under foreclosure notice. You should have told us before you stopped paying." "I didn't stop paying," I said quietly. "I stopped being responsible for it." A long silence stretched between us. I could almost hear his jaw tightening, the restraint he used to hide his fury. "Louise, you're being dramatic," he said finally. "You've always helped your family. It's not just about money, it's about duty." Duty. That word again. He wielded it like a weapon, a guilt-soaked reminder of the hierarchy that had always existed in our home. "No, Dad," I said softly. "It's about boundaries, and I've never had any with you." He exhaled sharply, then shifted tactics. "Your mother's been sick over this. She can't handle stress right now." She didn't seem sick when she was signing trust fund papers for Megan. That did it. The line went silent for a few seconds before he said, clipped and angry, "You had no right to go through my mail. And you had no right to use my loyalty as your financial cushion," I replied. The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that hums through your bones. Then in a low, deliberate voice he said, "If this is the kind of daughter you want to be, I hope you can live with yourself." He hung up before I could answer. For days, I didn't hear from any of them. I buried myself in work, trading markets during the day, journaling at night. but beneath the calm routines I could feel something rising, a pressure I couldn't name yet. Then one evening my mother called. "Louise," she began softly, "can you come over next weekend? Your father wants to have a family talk." I hesitated. "What kind of talk?" She paused. "He said it's time to clear the air. Megan will be there too." I almost said no, but something in her voice, a trembling mixture of shame and hope, made me agree. The day of the meeting, I drove to my parents' house with a calm that felt rehearsed. Snow clung to the trees, lining the driveway, the world outside, quiet and white, a deceptive peace before the confrontation I knew was waiting inside. When I walked into the living room, Megan was already there, sitting on the couch, arms crossed. She looked uncomfortable, her eyes darting away from mine. My father stood by the fireplace, hands clasped behind his back like a judge about to deliver a verdict. My mother hovered by the window, wringing a napkin in her hands. "Louise," my father said, gesturing for me to sit. "I'm glad you came." I sat down, crossing my legs, steadying my breath. He started with what sounded like an apology, though it was dressed in logic. "We all make financial decisions that others might not understand. The trust fund for your sister was a precaution. Megan's not as stable as you are." I let the words hang there, their condescension filling the room. "So," I said, keeping my voice level, "you created a six-figure safety net for her while telling me you couldn't afford to help me with anything. And you used my money, the money I earned, to keep this family's luxuries intact." He frowned. "We never asked you to." "You didn't have to," I interrupted. "You just let me believe that if I didn't help, everything would fall apart. And maybe it would have. But you built it that way. You built dependence around me." My father's nostrils flared slightly, a tiny twitch, but I saw it. My mother lowered her gaze. Megan shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't know, Louise," she said quietly. "He told me you were fine, that you didn't need the money." I turned to her, my voice soft but steady. "It's not about needing the money. It's about fairness. It's about respect." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't ask for any of this." I sighed. "I know you didn't. But you benefited from it. And while you were enjoying what I was paying for, I was busy apologizing for existing as the capable one." My father slammed his hand lightly on the arm of his chair. "That's enough. You're twisting this into something ugly. Family isn't a ledger, Louise." I met his glare. "You made it one the moment you wrote my sister's name on a check for $350,000 and left mine off." For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the fireplace. Then I reached into my bag and pulled out a folder, my own version of his records. Inside were years of receipts, bank transfers, property tax statements, medical payments, car insurance slips. Each page was labeled and highlighted. I placed them on the coffee table between us. "I kept track," I said quietly. "Every cent I paid in the name of family." My father looked at the stack like it was radioactive. My mother covered her mouth. Megan leaned forward, eyes wide. $118,000. I said, my voice calm but cold. "That's how much I've spent over the last decade on your bills. Your house, Megan's car, Mom's treatments, family trips, everything. I'm not asking for it back. I just want it acknowledged." My father opened his mouth, but no sound came out. For once, he looked small. Not because I had humiliated him, but because he couldn't control the narrative anymore. "I loved this family," I continued, my voice trembling now. "Every time you said you couldn't afford something, I stepped in. Every time you needed rescuing, I came through. I thought that made me good. I thought that made me loved. But now I understand it just made me useful." My mother began to cry quietly. Megan's eyes were wet too, though she stayed silent. My father stood abruptly, his face pale. "You've made your point," he said, his voice tight. "We're done here." I stood too. "No, Dad, we're not done. You taught me that family means sacrifice, but it was always mine. You built loyalty like a debt, and I kept paying the interest. But I'm finished now." I picked up my coat. The sound of the zipper closing was the final note in a song I'd been singing my entire life, the song of a daughter who thought love could be earned through giving. As I walked out, I didn't look back. Outside, the snow was falling harder, but the air felt different, lighter. My breath came out steady, not trembling. For the first time, I wasn't carrying them anymore. That night, I lay awake replaying every word. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, but the other part, the one that had learned how to trade pain for clarity, whispered that maybe I'd finally done just enough. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived in my mailbox. My father's handwriting, sharp, controlled, familiar. Inside was a check not for the full amount, but for $25,000 with a single line written beneath it. Consider this a start. I didn't cash it. I framed it. Because it wasn't about the money anymore, it was about proof. Proof that even the people who try to rewrite your story can't deny the truth once you start writing it yourself. 3 weeks passed before I heard from my family again. The silence was strange. It felt both peaceful and hollow, like the quiet after a long storm that had rearranged everything in its path. I didn't expect an apology, and I certainly didn't expect reconciliation. But one Saturday morning in March, my phone lit up with a message from Megan. "Can we talk, just us?" I hesitated for a long time. There was a part of me that still flinched at the idea of opening old wounds, and another part that wanted to hear what she had to say. Megan and I hadn't truly spoken in years, not beyond polite texts or surface-level updates filtered through our parents. I agreed to meet her for lunch the next day. The cafe she chose was small and quiet, tucked into the corner of a tree-lined street. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting by the window. She looked nervous, fiddling with her phone. When she saw me, she smiled a tentative, uncertain smile that carried more truth than all our previous conversations combined. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey." We ordered coffee, then sat in awkward silence for a few minutes. The hum of espresso machines and soft acoustic music filled the space between us. Finally, she took a deep breath. "I need to say something," she began, her voice shaky. "I know what Dad did was wrong. I didn't know about the trust at first. When he told me, I didn't even understand what it meant. He said it was just protection. But now I see it for what it was." I looked at her, studying her face, the same blue-gray eyes as mine, the same nervous habit of twisting her ring when she was anxious. For so long I'd seen her as the carefree sister who had everything handed to her. But sitting across from her now, I saw something different: guilt, maybe even shame. "I didn't ask for that money," she continued quietly. "And I didn't know he was making you pay for so much. When you showed those receipts, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I felt sick." I nodded, unsure what to say. She reached into her bag and pulled out an envelope. "I went to Dad," she said. "I told him I wanted to give half the trust back. I transferred half to a joint family account. I said if he wanted to keep the house, he could use it for that. It wasn't fair to keep something built on lies." I froze, my throat tightening. "You did that?" She nodded. "I can't change the past, Louise, but I can try to make it right." For a moment, neither of us spoke. My chest ached in that quiet, painful way that comes when the wall you've built to protect yourself begins to crack. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Thank you," I said softly. She smiled, small, hesitant, but real. "I used to think you didn't care about family," she whispered. "But now I see you cared too much. You carried all of us." Her words hit something deep inside me. I'd spent years believing that love meant sacrifice, that being the strong one was my role, my identity. But maybe caring too much without boundaries isn't love, it's self-erasure. We talked for hours that day. Not about money or blame, but about childhood, about the things we remembered and the things we'd misunderstood. Megan told me how suffocating it had been to always be Dad's favorite, how she felt trapped by the expectations that came with it. And I told her how invisible I'd felt, how every act of generosity had been mistaken for obligation. When we finally left the cafe, the air outside was crisp, and clear sunlight glinting off the melting snow. We hugged before parting ways, a real hug, not the hollow kind we'd shared at family holidays. For the first time, I felt the faint, genuine stir of something I hadn't felt in years: forgiveness. A month later, I received a call from my mother. Her voice was soft, almost careful. "Your father wants to see you," she said. "He's been thinking a lot. He's not the same lately." I didn't know what that meant, but curiosity and maybe a trace of compassion led me back to the house where everything had started. When I arrived, my father was sitting in his study, the same room where he used to dictate my future like it was a set of financial projections. But this time he looked different. Smaller. Weaker. His hands trembled slightly as he gestured for me to sit. "I hear you've been talking with your sister," he said, his voice gravelly. "I have," I replied. He nodded slowly, his gaze fixed somewhere beyond me. "She told me what she did with the trust." I said nothing. After a long pause, he spoke again, quieter this time. You were right. I was unfair. I thought I was protecting one daughter, but I was really punishing the other for not needing me. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. I always admired your strength, he continued, but I turned it into an excuse not to support you. I told myself you didn't need anything because it made me feel less guilty about giving more to Megan. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense, but in my father's language, it was everything. I sat there in silence, letting it sink in. He looked older than I remembered, the kind of tired that doesn't come from age, but from years of carrying the wrong pride. I can't undo what I did, he said, but I can start being honest. He slid a small folder across the desk. Inside were financial statements, the trust account, the house ledger, even a copy of his will. My name was on all of them now, equally listed beside Megan's. For the first time, I saw tears in his eyes. "You're my daughter," he said simply. "You always have been. I just forgot how much I owed you, not in money but in respect." I didn't cry then. I just nodded quietly. Because forgiveness doesn't always need words. Sometimes it's just the release of years of holding on too tightly. As I left the study, my mother stopped me in the hallway. She placed a hand on my cheek and whispered, "You taught him something no one else could, humility." I smiled faintly. Maybe he just finally saw me. Spring came early that year. The snow melted fast, revealing the green hills around Bear Lake once more. The house saved from foreclosure stood like an old ghost now reborn. When I visited it again months later, the air inside felt lighter. My parents were there, and for once it didn't feel like a battlefield, it felt like a truce. We ate dinner together quietly. My father asked about my work. My mother laughed at old stories, and Megan teased me about my stubbornness. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress, the kind of peace that comes after both sides finally run out of things to prove. After dinner, I stood outside on the porch watching the sunset melt into the lake. My father joined me after a while, silent. The wind carried the faint scent of pine and salt. "You were right," he said at last. "Family isn't about who gives the most. It's about who learns to give without losing themselves." I turned to him, my voice soft. "And sometimes the only way to teach that is to stop giving." He nodded slowly, a faint smile tugging at his lips. We stood there until the sun disappeared behind the hills. No grand reconciliation, no dramatic promises, just quiet understanding, and that was enough. It's been 2 years since that day. I've learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering without letting the memory own you. I still trade, still build, still live on my own terms. But I also visit my family more often now. Sometimes when I walk into that living room, I still see the ghost of the woman I used to be, the one who gave until she disappeared. But now she looks at me with pride, not pity, because I didn't lose my family when I stopped paying for their comfort. I found myself. If this story touched you, if you've ever been the one who gave too much, stayed too long, or believed love had to be earned, remember this. Sometimes walking away isn't an act of cruelty, it's an act of truth. If you felt something in my story, please like, share, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Have you ever realized your worth only after others took it for granted?